Next speaker for today is Zhang Beiyu. Zhang Beiyu obtained her PhD from the History Department at the National University of Singapore. She worked as postdoctoral fellow funded by the Macau Talent Program at the University of Macau from 2018 to 2020. Now she's affiliated with the Jinan University based in Guangzhou. She's the author of the monograph Chinese Theater Troupes in Southeast Asia, Touring Diaspora 1900s to 1970s, forthcoming from Routledge. Actually, the online version will be available in just about in 2 weeks, I believe. The link is now being shared in the chat room. So congratulations. Her research interests include cultural history, Chinese diaspora, theater and performances, and Cold War culture. Zhang Beiyu's talk today is titled Merdeka, Youth Solidarity and Cross-Ethnicity, Emergence of Multicultural Dance in Singapore, 1955 to 1980s. Beiyu?
Today, I'm going to talk about the current research that I'm doing, titled Multicultural Dance Making in Singapore, Merdeka, Youth Solidarity and Cross-Ethnicity from 1955 to 1980s. So before I get started, I'd like to briefly elaborate on the term Merdeka for the audience who are not familiar with the context. So Merdeka is a Malay term meaning free and independent from colonization. In current day public history, the Merdeka is understood as an emphatic term used to be called out by the peoples of Singapore, regardless of race, language, and religion. So it was a widely circulated term to referring to the Cold War decolonization history. So Singapore is a multiracial country, as we know, made up of a dominant proportion of ethnic Chinese, indigenous Malays, Indians, and other small amount of Eurasians. So like the picture on my right hand showcase that each racial groups dress in their distinctive ethnic style. They also preserve their own language, religion, and culture. This is part of the Singapore government's racial policy to tame and manage the racial relations and foster a racial harmony. So like the food, like the Malay eat Malay food, the Chinese eat Chinese food, and languages, the Chinese speak Mandarin, the Malays speak their language, and the Indians or Tamil speaking populations. So like the food, language, and religion, performing arts is also preserved and it develops along the racial lines. Like I put the picture on your left hand. So each racial groups present their own ethnic style dances. So what often come in mind what we often have in mind about Singapore's multicultural performance, a separate representation of ethnic traditions and the performance in Chinese, Malay, and Indian cultures. So extant scholarship tends to criticize this multiracialism and its attendant multiculturalism as a site of multiracial fantasy, meaning that there is no interracial communication or hybrid integration of different race cultures. It's just a fantasy to serve the political ideology. So I regard that there are actually two limitations in such understanding. The first one is that such scholarship makes art and culture ultimately a political choice, overlooks the individual agencies of artists and dancers. And second, it navigates the dance field merely in a national framework, such as nation building, national politics, and national ideologies. And it overlooks the relevance of international and regional development in shaping the dance practice, particularly the Bandung Conference and the decolonization process. So I propose that this study is not about the racially categorized ethnic dances. The primary focus here was on the integrated and fused cross-cultural pollination embodied through cross-ethnic representation. For example, Indians perform Chinese folk stories and Chinese performing Indian dance. And also another form is joint choreography by multi-ethnic dancers. It refers to a kind of single dance created by Chinese, Malay, Indian dancers. They work together for collaborations, and in this dance, they integrated their own ethnic elements to form a coherent, organic piece. So this is a kind of joint choreography I'm referring to. So the major contribution of the study is that by adopting an inter-Asia lens, I was able to unveil the hybrid context zone that celebrates and embraces the heterogeneous diasporic roots in its multicultural dance making. I divide the story into three stages. First one, sowing the seeds in the Cold War. So the earliest efforts of this multicultural dance making drew inspirations from ideas of cross-ethnicity, friendship, and unity in the anti-colonial Merdeka movement in the 1950s. The ideas gained mass support after the Bandung Conference. So there are a lot of local social cultural concerts formed to cultivate the appreciation of diverse ethnic cultures. These were the earliest efforts that have been done. The second stage was a phase of nourishment that saw the traveling and convergence of migrant dancers from India, Taiwan, and Indonesia. So they converged in Singapore and made contributions to the multicultural dance field. Without an identical lineage and culture to build upon, the construction of an integrated national culture of Singapore had to evoke old diasporic imaginaries from migrants' homelands. The reference were to be located in disparate inter-Asian nations such as India, Taiwan, China, and Indonesia. So the third stage was characterized by the maturation of local-born dancers who were basically trained by these migrant dancers. So the local-born dancers in the 1970s and 80s began to design joint choreography featuring the integration of Chinese, Indian, and Malay dancing vocabularies. They were often presented at regional and international festivals to highlight the diverse and elective nature of Singapore's dance field. So these are the basic storyline, but because the time limit, I would, in the following section, I would basically present some visual images about the period. Basically, these were my historical primary sources to support the argument. So the first two pictures belong to the stage one in the 1950s Cold War era. Inspired by the Bandung spirit that articulates cross-ethnic solidarity, friendship, and unity, a lot of local organizations began to organize this kind of multicultural dances by inviting Indian, Chinese, and Malay students to perform in the same platform. And by doing so, they cultivate an appreciation of each other's race culture. So the first one is called Talam Tarian. This is a Malay term, the dance night performed in 1960. And second one is called Malam Serni, the art night, organized by the Nanyang University in 1959. So from the pamphlets, we can see that they invited the famous Indian dancer, Mr. Bhaskar, number 8 here. Mr. Bhaskar was the person that I would like to introduce in more details, a very important pioneer of Indian dance in Singapore. And also they invited the Malay dancers, Kamola, to perform Malay traditional dances. So Mr. Bhaskar, this was the stage 2 when we come to independence and nation building. The nourishment witnessed the entering of 3 pioneering migrant dancers traveled from their respective homeland in India, Taiwan, and Indonesia. They represented distinctive diasporic roots and cultures and civilizations. They transferred the bodily knowledge about their own ethnic dances. And more importantly, these persons stretch across the ethnic communities and building new relationships. For example, Bhaskar was famous by his masterpiece, Butterfly Lovers, which was adopted from Chinese folklore story, Liangshan Bo Yu Zhu Ying Tai. So in the picture, we see the Bhaskar's Academy, which was made up of mostly Indian students, performing this Chinese folklore. The performance was a hybrid one, an artistic combination of performing elements drawn from Chinese and Indian culture. So in dance steps, the performers used Bharatanatyam for faster movements and Chinese operatic conventions for gestures and movement postures, accompanied by Chinese acrobatics and folk dances. So according to Bhaskar himself, it represents a happy marriage of two cultures. And secondly, inspired by these pioneer efforts of Bhaskar, the Chinese students also began to learn Indian dance, like the second picture shows, the Indra dance. So the second important person was Li Shufen, who was a Taiwanese and trained in Japan. And when she returned to Taiwan, Kuomintang was just retreated to Taiwan for establish a new regime. So it was launching the famous national dance movement, 民族舞蹈运动, to conduct anti-communist propaganda in the island. So as part of this movement, Li Shufen was sent to Southeast Asia in various cultural diplomatic tours, basically to battle for the hearts and the minds of overseas Chinese, to claim that the Kuomintang was the legitimate representative of Chinese culture through Li Shufen's dance. So it was in these encounters in the Southeast Asia tours that Li Shufen discovered Singapore a very meaningful place for her. It was diverse, it was embracing different cultures, and she really loved it. So she decided to settle down and beginning her lifelong career in Singapore. So she learned Indian dance and also actively engaged with the Malay community by learning from Malay dancers. And she also performed Indian character Anakali. The second picture on the right was a performance commissioned by Ministry of Education in Singapore in 1965, also by Li Shufen, called A Night of Singapore, that a joint choreography with Chinese, Malay, and Indian dancers performing the single piece. So the last person was Liu Chunwai, an Indonesian Chinese. And she also encountered Singapore in a cultural diplomatic mission sent by the Indonesian government in 1959. So she taught mostly the Malay Indonesian dances to the local Malay youth. She was also part of the member of the Malay Sriwana troupe. And most importantly, because she was an Indonesian Chinese, she was able to converse in Mandarin. So she also spent a lot of time teaching the Indonesian and the Malay dance to the Chinese students, like the picture on the top left showcased. And the picture on the right hand shows that Li Shufen was, Mr. Liu Chunwai was performing the Indonesian folk dance with the Malay community. And last picture was a one showcasing that Liu was also endorsed by the President Sukarno to the International Socialist Art Festival, World Youth Festival of Moscow World Festival of Youth and Students. So finally, these persons, because of the pioneering efforts of these migrant dancers, they nurtured a lot of local born first generation dancers who were dedicated to various kinds of joint choreography, like Fish Folk Suit in 1981, performed at ASEAN Festival of Performing Arts. And the second one, Unity in Rhythm, performed at the ASEAN Festival in Bangkok in 1983. So to briefly recap, the inter-Asia lens in multicultural dance making was threaded through for this important argument. The regional one was the regional international cultural development in the Cold War, and the second one was the pioneers of these multicultural dancers. These persons represented heterogeneous diasporic roots in India, China, and the Malay archipelago. So the multicultural dance epistemology of Singapore was acquired through these dancers traveling and touring in the Asia region. Yeah, thank you. That's all for my talk.